Awesome. Well, guys, thank you so much for bearing with us. The weather in Austin and coming in from College Station is a little insane. So the traffic's been bad, but we will dive on in. Quick housekeeping reminder. After we wrap up, you'll get an email with a survey. Once you complete the survey, you'll get your CEUs, the little certificate mailed to you. So yeah, don't worry about that. Just make sure you fill out the survey. And then I'll just introduce our wonderful speaker, repeat speaker. He spoke for us back in, I want to say October of 24.
That's what it was.
This is the great Dr. Erik Salwen. We're throwing a great in there. He is, let's see, an LPC supervisor, LMFT supervisor, founder and director over at the College Station Christian Counseling Center in College Station, and yeah, an amazing professor and supervisor at Dallas Theological Seminary. So that is how we got connected to Dr. Salwen. I was a student of his for a couple of years, and then he taught us a while back, and we loved what we learned, so we invited him back.
So thankful.
A barbecue enthusiast, concert goer.
Totally.
Anything else that we need to
know? No,
in there?
Well, lover of my wife, Julie.
There we
That's
go.
The biggest thing.
There we go. Okay.
So.
Well, I'll let you take it away now.
Thanks. It's really good to be here. I think, I don't know if like subconsciously I was just operating like I do in the counseling center, where I tell my clients, hey, it's an hour, but you contracted for 50 minutes with me. So that's not what we're doing here. But thanks for just the patience with coming through the weather. I was telling Stacy that literally I'm driving through Taylor and I get this. You've heard the big beeps on your phone with the emergency alerts, and it said flash flood warning. If you're not evacuating somewhere, stop right where you are and go nowhere. Wow. And I'm like, I don't see running water anywhere. I'm going to keep driving. So anyway, it is incredibly just amazing to be back with you all, to remember October 24 when we first met all together in this, I think maybe this exact same room. And then what's happened since then with the level 1 training for restoration therapy for most of you, and then just ongoing communications, and what I think we're going to get to look forward to in a couple of days too, of all getting together right back up here on the church campus. I wanted to just kind of continue almost, I think if it's okay, I'll do a slight refresher for everybody else who's out there who may not have been a part of what happened in 2024, as we think about what this work is. And a quick story just in terms of why this has been so, and I think I've heard some comments from you all in the same way of the importance of this work to you all and how you engage with people and seek to provide care for them, is just that there has to be a meaning underneath it. There has to be more than just, hey, I'm going to do my best to try to make somebody better. First of all, think, where am I getting off thinking that I have the power on my own to be able to do that? But secondly, as somebody who grounds myself in a faith in a God who does empower me, who is the reason why my heart changes and why I believe anyone else's does. How is the work I'm doing and how is the language I'm gaining connecting to that? How is it connecting to a sense that I'm part of something bigger right here as I'm sitting in front of somebody else who represents the pinnacle of his creation? So that's what really has generated all of my interest in restoration therapy, and why I want to be able to talk to you all today about what a lot of people in the restoration therapy clinical community are thinking about, and really, I would just say, I don't know, the fun word is just kind of noodling on. We're all noodling on forgiveness right now. It's a big thing. And for anybody, and if anybody's on Substack or YouTube, if you haven't already connected into what's called the RT Dialogue with Rhett Smith and Lance All, they actually just published, I think about a week and a half ago, about an hour and a half on forgiveness, and talked through some of this. I'm gonna do a lot of the similar language, but I'm gonna want to think and begin to think about a couple of other unique things related to it. But we're going to focus on the work of forgiveness, which, if any of you have done clinical work in forgiveness, you know how complicated it is. You know how a lot of times we'll start to hear stories, either with an individual in the room or with a couple or a family in the room, where things start flying and we don't know where to start. And that's kind of what, in the spirit of what Terry Hargrave actually had as one of his central themes for the entire work of restoration therapy, which is how do we organize what's going on in the room? Same thing applies here. We want to actually have language that helps us to organize what we're bringing. And so that's a big part of what I want to just lay out and introduce some elements of today. So, refresher slides for just the beginning part of what we have come to understand of core emotions that drive everything about the way that we behave. Research has indicated to us, and is continuing to build more and more every year, that there really are only two core emotions. One informs our sense of who we are, our identity, and that is love. And in the sense that we understand who we are in the context of love, we recognize that there are aspects of love that mean different things to us, right? One being, do we believe we have some sort of unique meaning and purpose? Do we have a reason for being? And in the sense that we know that we are paid particular attention to, right? That we are, the other word we like to use is cherished by another, right? We have a sense that we are that unique person. We are that one in the eyes of another who nobody else can take our place, right? But more than that, that not only are we unique, that we are worthy of sacrificing for, that the other sees us as someone not only as special and worthy of cherishing, but also that we are worth enough to them that they would actually give of themselves for our sake. And then finally, which this would make sense if the first two are true, right? If I'm cherished and I am sacrificed for, that person who is loving me in that way, or I could also use our context of faith, that God who perfectly loves us in those cherishing and sacrificial ways, also is going to always be with us. And that is a way of loving, or a way of knowing we're loved, that is distinct from knowing that we are unique, from knowing that we have worth. It's knowing that we are never alone, knowing that we are connected, that we are not isolated. We know too much of what we've seen in the room with the clients we meet with about how isolated they feel, about how alone they feel they are in the world or in whatever social circumstances they're in. So just incredible to get to a fuller picture of those elements of love that give us a sense of whom we are. But then the other core emotion, trust or safety, gives us a sense not of ourselves so much, but more of the world around us, right? It gives us a sense of especially in the context of relationships, the space between us and another person. Is that space trustworthy? Is that space safe? And can I, if I'm safe with you, hopefully move closer to you? Or am I going to experience a lack of trust and safety and need to create more distance, right? But just like the emotion of love, the emotion of trust has, and I think I mentioned this, in 24. I love the fact that the research emerges 3 elements, because I think that distinctly connects to the Godhead, to the Trinity, and to the sense in which we understand our God operating as Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. And so it shows up in much the same way in the area of trust, that there is this element of predictability in our human relationships. We need to know that you are going to be consistent with me. If I can trust you, I need to see that predictability and consistency. The theological term we use as we think about our God is his faithfulness, his unchangeableness, right? His immutability. Secondly, a sense of openness. I need to know that in my human relationship, that we are, we're not dealing with masks. We're not dealing with filters. You're not playing a role where I don't really know who you are. Instead, we are experiencing that sense of really being with the real person I'm sitting across from or standing with, right? And in that openness, in really seeing you, maybe even having you in a vulnerable sense disclose more of what's in here out in that space between us, by letting me know what's going on in your heart, in your mind, I have more of a sense I can trust you, right? And the theological parallel there is one of revelation, where if we really consider how God has revealed himself to us, we would realize that I think about the Apostle John in the first chapter of the book of Revelation, where Jesus shows up, and John says he literally falls down on the ground, face down, as though dead. And it's like, in the face of our God, we look around, and I think the thing that I mentioned a little bit earlier, that we sometimes pay the least attention to, but that is, again, the greatest display of God's glory on earth, is the pinnacle of his creation, is the fact that we get to sit with and be with others who are the most important way in which we get to see God in a tangible and physical form, is in another person. And so I want that experience of God's glory in the pinnacle of his creation to be one that is reflective of him. I want it to be one that is safe. I want it to be one that is trustworthy. I want it to be one that displays him as openly and clearly as possible, right? And then finally, that there is in our human relationships a sense of balance, a sense of fairness, a sense that we are giving and taking, not in a rigid way, but in a way where, even where there might be seasons where I'm giving more to you and others where you're giving more to me, that we are essentially recognizing that we are both committed to a sense of of caring for one another, of entering in with each other, and not just taking because I feel like I deserve more from you than you do from me, or out of shame thinking that I have to give and give and give and just end up empty because you never give anything back. And so this way of organizing our idea of, well, and just one more quick aside, the balance we have theologically, right? It is not balance. It is that God gives us everything. It is that out of his infinite resources and his infinite generosity, he gives everything to us, and that he expects essentially nothing. He expects us simply our gratitude, which is really just an expression of what he's already given. So,
Mm.
beautiful picture that has a measure of grounding that goes so much deeper than any other work that I've come across in what I get to use or think about as I sit with someone in the room. I am going to move really quickly through the pain cycles and the peace cycles because I want to get to something new for everybody. But in these violations that are committed of love or of trust that tell me something about myself or about the world around me that is not a message, right? It's going to tell me a lie. If what I'm recognizing, especially as one who grounds my own sense of value, my own sense of identity, my own sense of my place in the world in whom and how God is, these are lies. The messages that I will tell myself that I am unloved or unsafe don't represent the truth, but I feel like they are. I feel like they're true. My clients feel like they're true. And they respond in unhealthy ways. They cope with those core feelings in ways that are unhealthy for them and that hurt others, right? And we access some of the more kind of universally accepted behavioral research that there is a fight mode response in unhealth and a flight mode response in unhealth. Is that I'm going to blame you and tell you you're why I feel unloved, or I'm going to go into flight mode and retreat into myself and shame myself and tell myself the message I'm why I feel unloved. And we have language that you see on the slides that can help to describe that more, language that can help to inform what are the coping behaviors that I'm engaging out of feeling unloved. Also, what are the fight mode and flight mode responses to feeling unsafe? Fight mode, I'm going to externalize and begin to try to manipulate my world, right? Build walls, create distance, do other things that are going to allow me to change my circumstances in a way that benefits me, right? Because I feel unsafe. And so I engage these control strategies, these control behaviors that can look like perfectionism, defensiveness, demands, criticality, intellectualizing, or the flight mode response, which is not the only withdrawal method I have, but it is the one that simply leaves reality, that dissociates essentially. It's the place where all the addictions are, right? And it's where I just flee reality. I escape because the world is too unsafe. Everything around me is too dangerous for me. So the other side of that is how I remind myself of what's true, of remembering, especially if I have that value system that says, I know my God perfectly loves in all the ways and is perfectly safe in all the ways, that I can experience his peace, which helps me understand or know that I am loved, that I am safe, and gives me a whole different measure of strength by which to extend myself, not in blaming someone else for why I feel unloved, but to extend myself in a nurturing sense to tell someone, I have enough and I can actually give to you and care for you. To not end up repeating those lies about beliefs I have about myself that end up with me in a place of shame, instead to use the reinforcing messages of self-value, to let myself know that, and not in some fake it till you make it way that doesn't have any basis by which I'm saying this, but instead has a grounding in a reality that is so much greater, that says, no, there is a definition of me that is different, that I am one who has worth, that I am one who is never alone, that I am one who is unique in meaning and purpose, right? And then as I move out into my world, I have an opportunity using that strength of identity to engage in a way that exercises that strength, right? That engages in balanced give and take in relationships, and that stays reliably connected, doesn't just escape into the chaos. All right. All that brings us to the thoughts that we want to engage today around forgiveness. And I really am probably going to try to keep this pretty short. I want to talk first about trauma, because actually, in the sense that Terry has written all of the books he's written around forgiveness that are restoration therapy based, he had in mind specifically how we work with clients who have gone through some level of trauma. And definition, an emotional response to a deeply distressing or disturbing event, right? Really not, we can expand on that. There are lots of different new categories of things like acute trauma, chronic trauma, complex trauma, developmental trauma. Everybody is kind of looking for the ways in which they can describe certain circumstances that would indicate what is traumatic. All of it, though, essentially moves towards an idea of someone being overwhelmed in their ability to cope with the feelings of a diminished, pay attention to what I'm talking about here as related to what we just reviewed, almost always related to feelings of a diminished sense of identity. This comes out of the standard definition, right? And a disrupted sense of safety. Hello? Right? Originates from the Greek word trauma. Imagine that. For wound, initially referring to physical injury, but now widely used to describe physical, psychological, or emotional harm. And I want to make a distinction in what we're talking about today too, because we're going to focus primarily on relational trauma as it relates to the relational work of forgiveness, right? And so, quote from a research study in 2024 from Walters, he said, while event categories involving interpersonal abuse or an act of malice did not significantly differ from one another, there was a substantial difference in the severity of traumatic symptoms when compared to accidental events or those caused by natural disasters. Specifically, higher levels of post-traumatic stress symptoms were reported by individuals who had experienced intentional acts of aggression and abuse as compared to those who experienced non-intentional events. Kind of intuitively makes sense to us, but it's important that the research has established that, right? Now, the other thing that's been happening in the last, I would say probably 30 years or so, is there's been a research base that's been progressively growing around, and I love that our world of psychology has emphasized this. It has said, hey, yes, we all experience some measure of trauma, and it creates a deep wound potentially in the area of our sense of identity and our sense of safety. But are we stuck there? And all of us want to say, no, let's not stay stuck, right? And so the idea is that growth is possible. All of what is happening now goes to this place of saying, and this is another quote from that same study. It says, while trauma can cause considerable distress, there is growing recognition of the potential for post-traumatic growth following such experiences. Exploring the pathways to resilience and growth can inform strength-based interventions that not only alleviate distress, but also facilitate that growth. We want that. That sounds good, right? So this is not in your slide deck, so just hang on with this one for a second. Was looking at some other research that kind of was synthesizing all the forgiveness research that's been happening over the last 30 years or so. And it put the models that have been created, the forgiveness models that have, the language that people have come up with, into 4 headings or 4 categories of the ways in which we engage in helping people through the process of forgiveness. One is a health model associated with giving up anger and resentment that result in improved health and well-being. A second is work on philosophical models concerned with forgiveness as a moral virtue. Third is distinctly Christian models based on the premise that individual forgiveness mirrors divine forgiveness. And fourth, there are what are called pro-social models that view forgiveness as a form of altruistic behavior that restores and maintains interpersonal relationships. Right? And I bring those headings up to make the point that the work that has happened up to this point in the category of restoration therapy actually addresses all 4 of those headings. It's looking at individual well-being. It's looking at moral virtue. It is looking at our experience of and with God. And it is looking at how our human relationships experience restored love and trustworthiness. It's looking at all 4. And so I think that's really really good. Anyway, I'm gonna make certain comments along the way, but I think it makes sense explicitly to call it out at the beginning here that, well, not at the beginning, but halfway through, that our work in the area of forgiveness as it relates to restoration therapy is still about love and trust. And it honestly, in each of the stations we're going to talk about, not steps, in each of the stations, it's still about pain and peace. It's about moving into a greater sense, each person, and in the context of the relationship itself, of an experience of more love and more trustworthiness. And it's about a movement in both in the individual and in the relationship of moving out of pain and into more peace. It's still about those things at a core level. We can kind of, and again, if you listened to Rhett and Lance all the way through, I loved the way Rhett finished up the podcast this last week, because he said to Lance had made a comment about, how do you know when forgiveness has actually been achieved in a relationship? And he made the point to Rhett, he said, when there is a sense of restored love and trust. And Rhett was like, what? Like, we've talked about all these other words and all these other things, but going back to the core of what we know, and not just what we know, whom we know, right? The one whose nature we care more about than anyone else, the one whose character we desire to experience more than anyone else. He is the foundation for any work, any genuine, completed, or at least near complete, I'm going to make an argument on that one too, work of forgiveness. I don't think there is ever any sense of a completed work of forgiveness in any human relationship. I know Lance also, he even argued with me when I got on their podcast with them a couple months ago, because I started talking about this, and he's like, no, Jesus died, right? He completed the work, right? Justice has been met. And I'm like, yes and no, right? Already? and not yet, if we think theologically in the way that we've talked about things, right? There is such a thing at the end of Revelation of the great white throne judgment where all will be made right. And we're all waiting for that and hoping for that. And I think that also the fact that that has not happened yet, I'm jumping ahead a little bit here, but I think the fact that that has not happened yet is the clearest indication or explanation, I should say, for why we still have all of the pain in the world we have, for why we have all of the injustices in the world that we have, for why we have all of the personal experiences that we have in our own lives of a full restoration of love and trust with certain relationships not having been completed. Does that make sense? So, hence, and those of you who are in the level 1 training with me, hence our emphasis, and I think you all did a better job of honing in on this and bringing this up as a reality for us, both individually in our lives and in the work we do with clients, hence the continued presence of grief. It's the continued need for lament. All right. For those who are going to join us this weekend, we're going to spend so much more time just discussing and unloading all of the elements of what these things that we're going to talk about next mean. But I really want to introduce this before we take about the last maybe 10 minutes or so to just talk together, and I open this up to other thoughts that you have. Forgiveness, right? RT, in the way we've talked about love and trust and pain and peace, while it has a relational impact, is primarily an individual work, right? A work I do within myself to recognize the messages of pain I'm telling myself of how I feel unloved and unsafe and how I'm coping in an unhealthy way. And then what is necessary for me to remember in order to move back into a place of peace, of knowing that I'm loved, of knowing that I am safe. Forgiveness is explicitly about engaging the dynamic between the self and the other, right? The RT work that you all have spent more time learning about is much more, it has self-other impacts, like what we're going to talk about here, but that work is primarily one that happens between the self and the self, right? Within the self, if I can say it that way. You're saying the 4 steps to yourself, not to the other, right? What am I feeling? What do I normally do? What is the truth? What do I have the opportunity to do differently? And I'm doing that for the purpose of what? Emotional self-regulation, right? But the path of forgiveness, while it's defined, its perspective and place, it's variable because it's always inextricably linked to another person. It's not something I can just self-regulate on myself with. I have to actually connect to another in this work. And so that's why we actually call the categories, I don't know what to call them. Well, I do know what to call them. That's why we call them stations. That's why we don't call them steps, right? First reason for why we call them stations and not steps is, what do you do with steps? You start at 1 and you go on through to 2, 3, and 4, and you don't break the order, right? In forgiveness, there is, because of the dependency on the other, there is a need to have a different perspective. There is a need to, at certain points, depending on what the other decides or what the other says or does, to potentially move backwards, to look back to a previous station, to maybe even skip for a moment over one of the stations. And so I hope it'll become clearer as we talk about the stations. But number 1 is the perspective. Number 2 is the pace, right? And when I say pace, right, we think about the 4 steps in restoration therapy, and we think about how we've described that for somebody who is generally emotionally healthy, if they're going to come into our counseling office and work with us through engaging their 4 steps, identifying their pain and peace related to love and trust, and walk through the 4 steps, that we can probably get them there in about 5 to 6 sessions. But we also recognize the pace needs to be different if there are more embedded beliefs that the DSM primarily defines as the personality disorders, where it may be sometimes 3 times as many sessions that it would take to get them there. It's kind of the same principle. It's the idea that because of the variability of having the relationship between self and other, my pace might need to be different here. I'd like to work all the way through to the 4th station, and I'll say it this way: engage all 4 stations of forgiveness as measurably and as completely as possible. But I have no guarantee, especially with the 3rd and 4th stations, of the timing by which that happens, the pace at which I move through those things. That said, calling them stations doesn't imply that there's a lack of a path. I actually do believe there's a reason for station 1 being station 1. I think there's wisdom in engaging station 1 before you engage station 2. And before not moving to station 3 until you've engaged both stations 1 and 2 in a significant sense. Secondly, appropriate initial engagement of a station, I actually think, requires previous initial engagement of all of the previous stations. And I use as an example of that 2 Peter 1, right? He says, by his divine power, God has given us everything we need for living a godly life. We have received all of this by coming to know him, the one who called us to himself by means of his marvelous glory and excellence. And because of his glory and excellence, he has given us great and precious promises. These are the promises that enable you to share his divine nature and escape the world's corruption caused by human desires. And then he lists out, right, a path, right? He says, supplement your faith with a generous provision of moral excellence, and moral excellence with knowledge, and knowledge with self-control, and self-control with patient endurance, and patient endurance with godliness, godliness with brotherly affection with love for everyone. Right? Do I stop learning or acquiring knowledge after I've I guess exemplified some measure of moral excellence? No. I mean, I'm not gonna stop learning things once I move on to engaging some measure of self-control in my life, right? All of these elements of walking in more godliness, of seeking to be more patient in how I endure the circumstances of life. All of those are stations, if you will, that I'm engaging in different measures at different times, moving back and forth with different pace potentially too, right? But it's an idea that all of them actually flow. One flows into the other. And I think the same thing is true of the stations of forgiveness that we have, especially, again, as they evidence the person of the Godhead. If I engage all 4 stations, that doesn't automatically complete the process of forgiveness either. Part of that's because of the other, part of that's because of my own heart. Okay, so those stations, and I'm going to just move through to the last slide here, are ones, there are 4 stations. The first being insight, the second being understanding, the third being giving an opportunity for compensation, and the fourth being overt forgiving. And insight is rooted in the context of God's power, the power that he gives us. And this is also the reason why I did all of the review at the beginning of this hour on love and trust and pain and peace, is because I think that work of insight primarily is the way in which I am moving myself, accessing spiritual power to give me the ability to remind myself of whom and how I am, so that I can develop insight, additional insight from a relational other perspective into how violations occurred, how to stop them from continuing, and how to keep them from seeping into other relationships where I could potentially violate that. Right? Moving to, and that doesn't require me actively engaging the person who violated me. That work of insight. That is, it directly involves my perspective on that other. Right? But it doesn't necessarily mean me engaging with that other. From a standpoint of moving into the station of understanding, what we are accessing there is spiritual love, and particularly agape love. It's going to give us the ability, and this is going to be a weird word in the context of forgiveness, but it's going to give me the ability to rejoice in more fully living out the truth of whom and how I am, which is going to move me into an understanding of, number one, the violator's position, their limitations, their development, ways in which they have been hurt in their past, and then even efforts and intent that they have today that are not solely to hurt. It allows for me to humanize that other person. Number two, that understanding allows me to have a sense of my own capacity to violate other people out of my own pain, which is the primary place where I'm going to engage grief. And then how to live into the freedom I actually have by releasing the blame that I live out towards my violator. And I go to Galatians 5:1 as one of the core passages for that Christ did not die just to communicate the worth I have. He died for me to make me free. Right? And then we access spiritual justice to give me the ability to repent myself, to more consistently engage love and trustworthiness from the ways I have violated other people, which can move me into a consideration of giving my violator an opportunity. Considers, and this goes to Terry's work, defining a payment plan. What can they do? Sticking to that plan, but also making allowances for that action, and then consolidating the efforts of that violator to count against the violation. Meaning that when I ask them to do something to restore love and trust in our relationship and they do it, that I give them credit for that. Right? And then finally, this station of overt forgiving, where I directly and overtly confront the unjustified and trust-breaking damage with a basis of love and trust that has already been established through the first three stations, that engages with my violator in a way that, number one, comes to a place of agreement with them, right? Agreement primarily being about the specifics of the violation, what happened. We're going back to the actual event of what they did and both agreeing this happened. Secondly, we're acknowledging together how bad it was what happened, right? And they are taking responsibility for that violation. They're not taking responsibility for my feelings. but they're taking responsibility for the violation and how bad it was. And thirdly, an apology. And that apology has two distinct elements to it. Number one, a communication by the violator of a genuine wish that the violation never happened. And number two, a desire, or as Terry even says, a promise, in as much as we can, a promise for it never to happen again. So much more to talk about there, but there's kind of the overarching view. I do have a passage I want to read that I've been meditating on related to all of this, that goes to my favorite book, Ecclesiastes. I'll just be honest. It just helps me to understand the real more. But the writer says in chapter 11, the light is pleasant, and it is good for the eyes to see the sun. Indeed, if a man should live many years, let him rejoice in them all. And this is so important, let him remember the days of darkness, for they will be many. Forgiveness is necessary in this world for any light to shine. Everything that is to come will be futility. I think that statement speaks to everything up to the final judgment. And then he ends with this amazing statement of our ability to self-regulate, if I can say it that way. So remove grief and anger from your heart and put away pain from your body, because childhood and the prime of life are fleeting. So much there. And anybody who can make it to Hill Country Bible Church this Saturday, I am so looking forward to hearing everyone else's thoughts and engaging in dialogue about these forgiveness stations, about how to move between them, about what the implications are of the definitions of them, of particularly how it works itself out in the context of the individual circumstances of our clients' lives where they are hurting so badly. But it still always comes back to whom and how God is. It comes back to his nature being perfect love and his character being perfect trustworthiness. And how we have an opportunity to, number one, have eyes to see the sun, but also we have the opportunity in his power to shine the light of his sun to others. So just want to encourage you in that. Thanks for your grace in my late arrival and for the time that we get to talk about these things.
Thank you so much. We really, really appreciate it. So much. Just in 50 minutes to chew on. Ron, do we have any questions that are coming up?
Questions online, but people are saying you forgive the tardiness. And
Thank you.
I want to let the recording go for 10 minutes so that they're still able to see kind of what's happening as we do this.
Great.
Just to jump into Q&A, it's not coming from online, it's coming from in here.
Yep.
But it's about that third station of justice.
Yeah.
I think with my clients, when we say justice, they're like, yes, let's get vengeance, yes.
Yes.
But then when you introduce justice as giving opportunity for compensation, it's like, whoa, wait.
Yeah.
That means I'm creating an opening, and I don't want to create an opening.
Right.
And so then you go back to what station 1 and 2 is pretty important. Because without station 1 and 2, I don't know how to set boundaries around
Amen.
how to do station 3.
That's it. That's why I think that the community is still kind of trying to figure out, are they stations in the sense that I can just skip past 1 and 2 and just engage 3 from the word go? I don't think so. I really don't think you can. I think there is a measure of being able to be filled up, being able to have a sense of strength in whom and how I know I am, that has enough to be able to even begin to consider, number one, my violator as a person and not a monster. And number two, what could I potentially open myself up to of a process of restored relationship by giving an opportunity like you're talking about. And you know, we tend to think that it doesn't matter how much work I do on insight and understanding. There are some things that are done where there cannot be a move to giving any opportunity. I want to be really careful because I want to honor where people are, and I know even Terry has written in his books that there are some people who just ultimately make the decisions not to move past the second station. I think if we take into account humanity being an expression of the image of God, that, and I'm not saying that there aren't circumstances where people never show themselves to be trustworthy enough for me to step in and give them that opportunity. In fact, I got to read something here around post-traumatic growth. There's a study that was written specifically. The name of the study is "The Link Between Post-Traumatic Growth and Forgiveness: An Intuitive Truth" by Pamela Fisher at Oklahoma University. She was referencing the work that people were doing coming out of the 1995 Murrah building bombing in Oklahoma City. And we know if you know from the story, Timothy McVeigh never expressed any remorse for what he did. But she writes here in the study, she says, an example of a moment of humanity where forgiveness is granted is exemplified by a woman who lost her 42-year-old husband. A 40-year-old mother of three spent the first year after her husband's murder going to the theater, to concerts, buying tickets to any event she could. She did this in addition to working full-time, keeping up a large house on 10 acres, tending a large garden because she and her husband had always planted a large garden. She coped by spending almost every minute of her time doing something, anything. The second year, she ran out of energy, and the reality of her husband's death hit her full force. In addition to feelings of intense loss, she found herself consumed with hate for Timothy McVeigh and his attorney, which was quite troubling for her. I am a Christian, and I am not a person who believes that one should feel this kind of hatred towards others. I don't like myself for having this kind of hate, but I can't seem to let it go. Like all survivors and family members, she was given an opportunity to fly to Denver, Colorado to attend the trial. When she was there, she happened to see McVeigh's father sitting alone at the bar in the hotel where she was staying. She commented that he looked so alone. She spontaneously went over to him, put her hand on his shoulder. Mr. McVeigh, I want you to know how sorry I am that you have to go through this. I want you to know that I am thinking about you. She didn't tell him that her husband had been killed in the bombing or that she was there for the trial. As she later described this experience, when I put my hand on his shoulder and told him that I was thinking of him, I felt the hatred melt away. It was remarkable. That sense of being able, even if she wasn't connecting directly to the person who had violated in the deepest way, taken her husband away, she still was able to engage the humanity through his father and connect in a human way, to a way that allowed for the hatred to melt. And I read that story right? Because I think there are different ways to give opportunities. Right? She kept the boundary of not directly engaging the one who she knew had no remorse. But that's another evidence, I think, of all the different dimensions and all the complexities of what this thing can actually look like. What ways we can even also maybe creatively think about with our clients of how to help them to move into the different stations. I knew there was a reason why I found that and your question just brought it. So thanks.
You killed us with it.
It got me too.
I was just thinking, before you read it, maybe as you started, I was thinking through all the ways in which we do see insane ways people engage in forgiveness that seem so, I mean, you look at it and go, well, I don't know that I could do that.
Yeah.
It's so mind blowing.
Yeah.
But in working through these stations and remembering who we are, at some point in that journey, we have a big sense.
Yeah.
But I just think of myself and so many of my clients, how we feel justified to stay
Yes.
in the anger and retaliate. We just feel so justified in that. And it's very hard to move past that.
So hard. So hard. And that brings it right back to what Brian just said too, about how important the first two stations are. Right? Because if all I engage is justice and power and love are not a part of it, then all I'm thinking about is vengeance. And if all I'm thinking about is love and I don't engage power and justice, all I'm doing is guaranteeing that I will be exposed to further violation and abuse. The balance between these, the engagement of all of the elements is no guarantee, right? That I won't have to retreat back into, that I won't have to change direction and go back into some of these works, some of these elements. And that again is a reason for grief, but also a reason for great hope in what we know is coming. That's where I wasn't willing to just let Lance have his picture of the cross and just be there with that and just have that be complete, because I don't feel that. I don't feel a sense of perfect satisfaction. I feel the gaps. I feel the places where there are still, and not even just in my own personal relationships, in the way I feel the injustices in the world and the things that are happening that result in death and destruction and pain and just all of it. And it makes me long for that day.
Well, even in that story, we don't know. My curiosity can't help but wonder, like, how many times was this for her a moment and it was wiped clean? Or how many times did she have to move through different components, through the different stations?
The wife.
Yes, right. As it unfolded, as she saw the trial,
Yes.
Who knows how many times she had to go back there and do that work.
Yeah, the hatred may have melted in that
Yeah.
moment. Did it never return? I don't think so. And I don't laugh at that. It's not a funny thought, but it's real.